Hey, what's up guys? And today we are gonna merge two flavors that everybody loves, bacon and whiskey, because we're gonna make a bacon old fashioned. It's an iconic drink that helped to set off the fat washing craze that is now sort of baked into cocktail culture. Now, if you don't know what fat washing is, or you've never had this drink because it seems complicated or intimidating, I'm gonna show you just how easy it can be. But before we get started, hit the subscribe button if you want more Drinks with Dave, and let's go make a bacon old fashioned. Now, the original bacon old fashioned was created in 2007 by a bartender named Don Lee at the New York City bar called Please Don't Tell. People know it as PDT. Now, as the story goes, Don was inspired after tasting Benton's bacon at a nearby restaurant called Momofuku. This bacon has a distinct flavor and it can impart its smokiness into anything you cook with it. Now, apparently Don really wanted to get these flavors into a cocktail, so he experimented with what we now know as fat washing, and he came up with a drink and called it the Benton's Old Fashioned, or the Bacon Old Fashioned. They called it Benton's because that's, again, the brand that they were using. The drink was basically an overnight success story, and it helped to kickstart the fat washing craze that has been baked into cocktail culture ever since. So you might be wondering, what is fat washing? And it's not that complicated. Fat washing is basically a technique that's used to infuse fats and oils into alcohol in order to create new flavors for cocktails. Now, the process is a little time consuming, but it's actually very simple. Some common types of fat washing that you might see would be like brown butter, coconut oil, sesame oil, olive oil. You can do nut butters and even duck fat. But of course, for this drink, we are going to be using bacon fat. So let's just dive into exactly how to do it. So fat washing is basically a two-step process. The first step being infusing the alcohol with the fat, and the second step being extracting that fat from the alcohol so that you just have mostly the flavor that's left. You're only going to need a few things for the first step: your alcohol, your fat, and some sort of freezer-proof container. So we'll just begin by adding our alcohol. And I'm using a 375 milliliter bottle. I don't need that much bacon-infused bourbon, so we're just doing a half batch today. So for 375 mils, we're gonna add in 3/4 of an ounce of our bacon fat. We just add it right in. And make sure that you have filtered out the bacon fat. You don't want little bits in there. I just use a regular bar double strainer and it works perfectly fine. You'll notice when you add it in, all of the fat wants to rise to the top because it's less dense. What we want to do is increase the surface area exposure. So we'll just take like a bar spoon and we're going to give it a nice little stir. I like to mix it until the bubbles get a little small and you just get a little bit of this cloudiness. It tells me that the fat has really moved through the alcohol. Now, once you've got it nice and mixed in there, you'll see that the fat does start to almost immediately come back to the surface. All you need to do is let this sit for about 2 hours on the counter, and then we're gonna transfer it to a freezer where you're going to freeze it overnight. So here is what I made last night, and it's ice cold. But what you can see is that all of the fat has come to the surface, and it's basically a solid chunk. Now, I like to use a rubber glove for this, but all we want to do is just reach in and take the fat out. If it's nice and frozen, it just kind of comes out in chunks. Just discard that. If you're sensitive to cold, this can be a little chilly on the fingers. Okay, so now that we have that big chunk of fat sort of out of the way, we want to filter this a little bit further, and we want to move fast because you don't want the fat to warm up and redissolve into the liquid. So what I like to use is a mason jar and a coffee filter. So these coffee filters come in handy, just the way that they work. I just plop the thing on top and then I fold down the edges so I can pour straight in. Now, this part could be a little bit time consuming, so patience is a virtue here. You could use a nut bag or cheesecloth and they can go a little bit faster, but I find that coffee filters are the best. It's gonna extract the most particulate matter out and it's going to still leave you with a great mouthfeel and all the flavor. And while we wait for that, I forgot to mention, the bourbon that I used is a higher proof bourbon. This is Bullet and it's 90 proof or 45% alcohol. The higher proof can extract a little bit more flavor as well as kind of cut through the fatty texture that you get from the fat wash. So if you can, go with 90. Okay, so now we've got our fat wash bourbon, and this is basically ready to use. You can keep it and store it in a jar, but I like to bottle it back into the bottle, so. And you will notice that there is a slight amount of volume loss. This happens every time I fat wash, no matter what liquor I use, no matter what fat I use, so don't be alarmed. Before we go on to the drink, I want to talk about safety. So this is an animal fat, and this fat does go rancid. So when it comes to storing, make sure you store it in the refrigerator. It'll keep for about 3 weeks. I wouldn't go past that. I usually draw the line at about 2 to 2.5 weeks. The best way to make sure that you've got something that's safe to drink is to just label it. So I just put a date so I know exactly when it was made. And we'll just put that on the back of the bottle. Now that this is ready to go in the fridge, let's just get the other ingredients and get this drink made. To make the bacon old fashioned, we are gonna need our bacon fat washed bourbon, maple syrup, Angostura bitters, and an orange. As you saw, the bourbon is our nicely dated and labeled Bullet 90 proof bourbon. The maple syrup that we're gonna use is a grade A dark, and the original was made with a grade B maple syrup, but the grading system has changed over the years, and grade A dark is the same as the grade B. It's just darker and a little bit more robust. Angostura is what we're using because this is what Don Lee chose for his old fashioned, and it just works. And since this is an old fashioned, we will start with our mixing glass and begin with 2 ounces of our bacon fat washed bourbon. Then we'll add 1/4 ounce of maple syrup. And 2 dashes of Angostura bitters. Ice it up and give it a stir for about 25 or 30 seconds. I can already smell the savory bacon in this. Add a lump of clear ice to our old-fashioned glass. Strain the cocktail over it. Cut a swath of orange peel and express the oil. And we will garnish this with a little orange peel. And that, my friends, is a bacon old fashioned. You gotta have a piece of bacon when you're drinking this. It starts out with the orange oil on the top, and then it, tastes like an old fashioned right away. You're like, oh yeah, this is an old fashioned. You get that hint of maple, but then the subtle bacon flavor comes through. And the mouthfeel is different. It's got a little bit more texture to it. It's not offensive. It's not way too much smoke or bacony flavor. I mean, it still feels like an old fashioned. It just has that little extra something. I guess that's it. We're on to the next drink. Oh, before I go, I want to thank all of my patrons very much. Without you guys, I could not do this channel. And a special shout out to Lori. I think I forgot you in the credits and wanted to make sure that I gave you a special shout out. Anyway, now we're done for real. Cheers.